Yeah, I graduated from college last year. I got my degree in human development, and after graduation, I went right into the workforce and started working in mental and behavioral health. And what gets me up in the morning is really just feeling like I have a purpose, believing that that it has something that can be of value to people who are in need or who want to optimize their own wellness. If I were to go back to where I identified the first point in time to where I had a point where I needed help and I experienced trauma was when I was 6 and I was sexually abused. And that was my first memory of existence. That was my first memory of being a child and being in a place. And it's funny how I don't remember much before or after that for a long time. My first memory is really that. And that was really a pivotal moment in my life, that moment right there, because my whole family was involved in that. And that was when my parents started to notice things. Or they became just more aware because of that moment, who knows. Either way, that was when things started happening. And Amanda started becoming oppositional or having issues with rules or whatever. You know, I'm too young to know exactly what happened, but I remember I had this visual of being in a room with a therapist, or maybe it was a case social worker, and I had this memory of just my legs sort of swinging in the chair, and that's to me a visual of just, I was so young and I was innocent, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't have the reasoning neurologically to even understand that what happened was bad. The first depressive episode that I had was actually when I was in 8th grade. So the first manic episode was when I was 18, a freshman in college, but my first depressive episode was back in 8th grade. It was when I blew out my left knee. I was a big soccer player. My big outlet was soccer and sports and letting it all out on the field and that team camaraderie and being a part of a community and feeling belonged and feeling like you were able to give something. And when I blew out my knee and had to go into surgery and get all my ligaments replaced, that was a really big point in my identity that was I had to pull away from a big part of how I identified, which was sports. And I had to accept the fact that you can't play soccer for a year, if not ever. And being told that as an 8th grade kid going through puberty and transitions and questioning and grappling with sexual orientation and all these different things was really difficult. And that's when I first experienced my depressive dip. My highest manic state was when I was a freshman in college, and it was just like the best day of my life, right? I was so happy. It was like, here's Amanda on a normal day, and then here, just times it by 10, and I was so manic that I, just was doing things that were not socially acceptable. I wasn't safe, and I wasn't able to really think outside of my own thought bubble. And that was the hardest part of it, was trying to cope with the fact that here's this dysfunctional Amanda and here's this functional Amanda, and they're both happy and good mania, but yet it wasn't able to really, it wasn't healthy. Yeah, I did a little bit of burning, a little bit of cutting. It just made it real. It made it feel like I still could feel something. I could translate this cloud of thought and these sort of cyberspace thoughts and feelings and senses into something that was real, that I could see, that I could feel. Like, you still have something pumping through you when you see the effect of hurting yourself. But it wasn't to the point of trying to kill myself. My experience with that was very much, we think you have depression, we think you might have this, we think you might have that, and I felt like there was very little space to where it could be like, Amanda, how do you experience this? How do you, if you were to put it in your own words, what does that look like? I think I really would have appreciated that as an artist who sort of paints a different picture for things in my own mind, and as someone who doesn't really attribute my experiences to the status quo or what's normal or what's written in the textbook. Yeah, art has been a really cathartic and therapeutic process, an outlet for when I was going through stuff or when I do go through things that I feel like I'm not able to translate verbally or mentally. When I was in the hospital after I had my major break, there was this moment where this individual who worked at the hospital gave me some crayons. And the reason why she gave me crayons was because that was a safe tool that I could use in the hospital. They're non-toxic, you can't really hurt yourself or others with crayons as easily as other instruments, perhaps. And so when I was given crayons, that was a huge turning point in my journey and in my mental health, and how I was able to utilize that tool to embed my voice and tell my story and visually translate it in a language that was meaningful to me. And also the process, what I use is, so here's one piece that I've made. And how I make this piece is a perceptual process because I do these layers. So the first layer, I'll do like a whole layer of yellow, and then I'll do a whole layer of orange, and then a whole layer of red, green, blue, whatever it is. And those layers, to me, perceptually builds, sort of constructs these layers of experience and memories, points in time. And then I cover that layer, and then I add a new layer. I think about it, I add a new layer. Construct, I build a new layer. I reconcile, I build a new layer. And so this process of building and constructing my identity in that point in time was really, really important for me. And also a way of reconciling that innocence that I felt that I lost when I was little, because crayons were what I would, that's what I used when I was very little. And so now using them when I was 18 years old in a hospital was really a reclaiming of that innocence through this sensual perceptual process of using crayons. The smell, the feel, the touch, they break and I get a new one. It was just really, really meaningful to me, and the layers of that construction, and then etching away with this little screwdriver. I didn't have this in the hospital, I actually just used my fingernail. But the process of then deconstructing these layers that I would build was really, really cathartic, and really allowed me to become vulnerable and sort of acknowledge those layers in time and sort of accept them. So my family, my primary family, I have a younger brother, an older sister, and a mom and a dad. And they've been a really supportive system for me going through all these different sort of dips and highs in my mental health journey, and they've always been right there for me, either a text away, a call away, or they're right there in person, willing to listen or help, and that's how it's always been my whole life. Whether I was able to accept the help or understand the help, it just depended on where I was and where they were, of course. But my family's always been a huge part of who I am and my mental health from day zero of my life to where it is now. And right now, romantically in my life, I've been dating a girl. Her name's Elisa. We've been dating for almost 2 years now, and she's a huge part of my life too. And I feel really happy being with her. The one thing that's been challenging in our relationship is the fact that we are, two girls in a relationship, and historically in society that was seen as something that wasn't normal or wasn't socially or politically accepted. And so we are always working on that and how we can be safe and comfortable in our own relationship while also acknowledging the fact that there are other social pressures and stigmas out there. And how do we deal with that? How do we interpret it? How do we acknowledge and accept it while not letting it hinder our relationship, but to allow it to just emerge more feelings and draw us closer together and think about ways that we can deal with it or cope with it, whether it's going to support groups or just talking about it, or maybe just being private and being okay with that, and being okay with the fact that we don't have to justify or rationalize or explain who we are or how we feel towards each other. We just feel, and that's it. A big part of understanding what stigma meant to me, whether it was self-stigma or social stigma, was words of wisdom that my grandpa gave me, which was, when you point your finger, you got 3 fingers pointing right back at you, which are asking you who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. And so whenever I think of how I feel about something or make a judgment on something, I always sort of ask myself the same questions. And why are you feeling that? What made you identify that? And what's your purpose in doing so? And that was really a pivotal point for me in absorbing or feeling my own stigma. When I felt the most stigmatized by others was when I felt the most stigma in myself. So when I was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, which I don't currently identify as, in receiving that diagnosis of being mentally ill or having a mental illness, all of a sudden I felt like a bad person. I felt negative. I felt this weight of feeling like this person in society that wasn't accepted or that was different in a bad way. And in absorbing that stigma and absorbing that self-stigma of receiving that diagnosis, I think it projected that in a lot of ways, because I remember feeling the most social public stigma when I felt the most self-stigma. So I don't know if I could say that, that individual or those people stigmatized me because they stared too long or because they looked at me funny, because maybe my own bias was that I was also really aware of how negative I felt myself. So I really can't blame someone if they're like, why is your attitude so bad today? Like, I could say, yeah, you're stigmatizing me, but then I have to look at myself in the mirror too and be like, well, you were having a bad day and you were putting out that energy that you didn't want to be messed with, or that you were just feeling negative and didn't want to talk to anyone. I mean, when we project that, when we exude that in our behavior, we're gonna get that in return in a lot of ways too, I think. At least I did when I put that out there. But then all of a sudden, when I felt proud of myself and even said, hey, I have bipolar disorder, and I said it like in this sort of motivational way, all of a sudden they react, oh, okay, cool. So, there's this, again, this relationship and this reflection between perceptions and how we exude those perceptions that translates into either stigma or, oh, that's interesting. What does that mean to you? And so, I think there's ownership on both ends of it. And first it has to start with ourselves. And that's when I got better, was when I started to acknowledge myself as translating my experiences, however I labeled it, into a way that was positive, with my demeanor, with my gestures, with my tone, with my behaviors, everything. So whether I say I have bipolar disorder or not, the way in which I say it is super meaningful and powerful to not only myself, but how others interpret who I am and how I see myself too.